And with that, it is my honor to introduce our moderator for today's webinar. She is the president and CEO of DreamBox Learning. Please welcome Jessie Woolley Wilson.
Well, welcome to this webinar. We are thrilled to have in our presence such wonderful innovators, but such great humanitarians who are leading the charge in school reform. We're joined by Kevin Hall, Kinnari Patel-Smith, and Jason Bransford. Welcome, you three. So I ask you to take yourself off of mute so we can jump in. So COVID has forced new models of learning on learners, on learning guardians, on families, and on administrators and CMO leaders. We've all had to adapt and build the plane while we fly it. And it's forced some tough choices and put intense pressure on everyone. How has your definition of success changed during this pandemic? Kevin, I might start with you.
Great, and thank you, Jessie, and thanks to Kinnari and Jason for this and the Alliance for making this all happen. So Jessie, I would say for us at Charter School Growth Fund and how we try to work with the 140 networks and single site charter schools that we work with around the country, I think the biggest thing around success for us is really trying to start with leading with care and all about the care for the teams. And you'll hear from Kinnari and Jason on this, that is a primary piece of care, and then really around the student and families, and really trying to think about how can we all be in service for them every day in this situation that we're all in. And I think really sort of starting with that care mentality, I think is important. And then I'd say the second one is being willing to try new things,
right?
Try to be willing to sort of break paradigms that you may have had, to really just say, as long as we're starting with care and we're willing to change, to test, and to keep moving, I think those are I would say the two pillars for us. But really that idea of starting with care, I think is critical around all of this.
Thank you, Kevin. Kinnari, what's your perspective on it?
And I would align with Kevin on this. We quickly realized that our original definition of success, be it academic achievement, orientation, all those things still mattered. But at the end of the day, knowing that this pandemic will, and we know it will pass, we wanted to be whole people. We wanted to make sure that when people do come back, that they're healthy, and I mean that in all aspects of the word,
Mm-hmm.
physically healthy, mentally well, socially well. We really talked about creating a definition of, while we needed to be separate and socially distant, our new definition of what success could be and what we designed for in Atlanta was ultimately one of being spiritually connected and intimate, so that we could still feel that closeness and that community and sense of belonging, which ultimately will be the fuel or the power to get us through this moment. And when we came back to work, and we will, in brick and mortar, we'll pick up at forces that we haven't yet experienced and design in even better and more robust ways. But ultimately, that we had to come back as well and healthy people in all ways of the word.
Jason, what is your take?
Yeah, thank you. I agree with what Kevin and Kinnari said, and it's an honor to participate alongside each of you as well. We didn't want to lose ground on the academic progress that we had made with our students over the years leading up to this. That didn't change. what did change is we started to think about how can we think a little bit more holistically about our role right now, when so much is so uncertain and so much is up in the air and there's so many questions and instability right now. How can we become a force for stability in the lives of these students who are, many of them at home by themselves because of their parental situation or have different circumstances? Like, how can we be a force for stability for them? And so we started thinking about, like, what does that mean for live lessons versus like assignments that they do without a teacher? How often should we be getting together with them? What should that look like for the adults, not just the students, but how should we be a force for stability for our adults as well? And so it really just changed like what we felt like our role was, because when a student's coming into your building day in and day out, by design, you can be a force for stability that way, but it just looks a lot different and the planning looks a lot different whenever you think about that happening from home, given the wide variety of circumstances that our students and staff come from in their home.
When you say force for stability, it makes me think of the typhoon that we're all living in. And there were typhoons within the school learning community, and there were typhoons in the broader American context. And I'm just wondering, from a leadership perspective, sometimes we put pressure on ourselves to have all the answers. And when we saw what was happening in the wake of the George Floyd murder, and we wake up this week and we see what's happening with Breonna Taylor, how do you embrace that as leaders? How do you incorporate and give space for what people are experiencing in their kind of real lives and the typhoon that is battering them about? How did you lead through so much uncertainty, both inside and outside of schooling? Jason, I see you nodding.
You bet. I think one of the things that's really key in leadership, when things are really unpredictable or just bad, predictable and bad sometimes is really what it boils down to. I think number one, letting yourself really be seen as human is critical. Like, we're all processing a lot of emotions from a variety of different things. And like, oddly, during the COVID time, like, it wasn't just COVID. There's so many things happening on a personal and political and natural disaster type scale that I think letting yourself really be seen as human is the first piece that I think is critical. I think the second thing that we started to think a little bit differently about in our leadership roles was like how often we need to be communicating. When things are running along as normal, communication is a key role in leadership, but communication becomes even more critical when things get really unpredictable or get difficult to manage. And so I think that's another thing, is like ramping up the communication. I think part of ramping up communication really is visiting with your staff and your executive teams really about why we're doing what we're doing. Mm-hmm. It can seem disconnected at times, that like we're still going to try to provide a high quality education for these students when so many bad things are happening in the world. But whenever we start talking about why it is that we're making the efforts that we are making, that puts a lot of value and a lot of meaning behind. Like, if we sit back and do nothing, like, we're actually not helping the situation. And so here's how we're going to choose to engage and do everything that we can to make this situation better. We can't control what it is that we can't control, but here's some things that we can control and try to make better for our students and for ours.
So it sounds like you relied on your values, on your organizational values, as you kind of linked your why to the external context.
Absolutely. And I think that's so critical when things get difficult, tying everything that you do back to your values, things that people already see meaning in and they see the value of those things, it becomes really critical. And to communicate how those pieces are connected, your values and what action you're taking right now.
Kinnery, does that resonate with you?
Yeah, it's actually the first thing that I wrote down. I wrote down 3 things as Jason was speaking, and I think this may be a theme of as Kevin speaks as well. But I wrote values, leadership, and creating space. So I think in times, that we are in today, call it 2 pandemics, maybe more, values-based leadership and going to your guiding principles and your core values is the first thing. We have student-focused and people-centered as our first 2. And so that meant for us in practicality, creating space. We actually took an equity pause. We were in the middle of a data day yesterday in virtual space, and the CNN news started coming through, and we lost focus. And we did an equity pause, which is a practice that we've begun doing, and we tried to persevere. And about 15 minutes into that, my chief of staff said, I can't do this anymore. Like, we have to actually call it. Today is now over. Everybody needs to do what they need to do: read, connect with people, take a walk, breathe, check on your family and your loved ones. So that's the creating space so that values are alive, as Jason spoke about, I think is one thing we do in these moments. Speaking when my voice shakes is another that I've been doing. I don't have all the answers, and I don't pretend to know all the answers. And sometimes I feel like those above me and are throwing me under the bus and saying, well, I don't want to make the decision, so you make it. Whether that's district or state or our national government. And so I don't have the answers, and I've just gotten used to now, like I'm getting more comfortable saying I don't know, but when I do know, you will know first, be it around racism in our country or the pandemic and how we're going to deal with school. And then the third thing that we are getting better at, this is something that we are getting better at, and this goes to what Jason just said, is like, where can I make decisions that are right for our organization? Where can I create clarity and timeliness and create black and white in the gray, and stick to it, even if those other partners haven't gone yet? So are we gonna go first with staying virtual through December? Are we gonna go first with coming back on Tuesday? You know, where can we go first, and where can I create some calm in the midst of these storms or typhoons?
So what is an equity pause?
So an equity pause, anyone can call an equity pause. It's when an injustice occurs between a majority and a minority, or you just are feeling in your heart, in your head, you may have observed a microaggression, and or a missed opportunity where somebody cut somebody off or something happened in the news. And so yesterday I called the equity pause because my CNN alert came on. And what you do is you put both of your feet on the ground and you take an inhale and you take an exhale. For us in Atlanta, it's a ritual where we call into the space what the harm was. So in that moment, I said, I'm honoring the life of Breonna Taylor and holding in my heart her family as this injustice occurred. And we all took in a deep breath and then an exhale. That, you know, is it's a quick moment. And so I did that. And then my teammate, called into the space. That wasn't enough. Like, I'm reading now, and so then she texted me and she said, Kinnari, I'm gonna wrap up the day. And I said, this is our organization. And yes, she said, as a white woman, I can't keep persevering on day to day. And so my chief of staff wrapped up the day.
Well, it sounds like you're embracing your vulnerability. And I think sometimes we as leaders underestimate the power that comes with authentic vulnerability, saying what we know, what we don't know, admitting that we're suffering too. Does that resonate with you, Kevin?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, Kinnari and Jason just
amazing.
I wrote that. I mean, one, it's awesome for me to hear from both of you, and super powerful, and all three of the points that made around leading with values, leaning on your values, making the decisions and clarity, as both Kinnari and Jason mentioned, and then I think the third one for me is that sense, Jesse, that you just named, and I see it so much in you, is that sort of humility and grace, that like we don't know everything, and we won't, and we'll communicate when we do, and also in that same moment having what Kinnari was saying in terms of having the conviction to make the calls when you feel like it's the right thing for your organization, whether it's, hey, we're going to be the first ones who say, we're going to stay remote for these 2 months, like Kinnery, that may be the first one in her geography. And then, having the organization then rally around how are we going to make this an incredible experience for students and families, and do the absolute best now that we have that clarity on what we're going to do. And I think one of the things that I would say that I've observed in watching many charter leaders like Kinnery and Jason do is to lean into those pieces and also invest a lot in their relationships with their students and families, and make sure that their families are informing really and helping to shape those conversations and those trade-offs, because these are all trade-offs. So many of these things, it's
our choices. There's no doubt.
No perfect answer, and it's all about trade-offs. And I just think what I've seen from the best leaders and organizations doing this is that they, again, start with care, start with their families and students, and then build from there.
It really resonates with me what all of you are saying. And I think in moments when we feel like we are alone and we are vulnerable to those wins, we find strength in locking arms with people who have similar values. And that same win just doesn't feel as hard. That is definitely what we embraced at DreamBox to get through this. Take care of each other, take care of our clients, and if we do that, we'll take care of DreamBox Learning. So let's talk about the impact of forced distance learning as schools were forced to close. Some have come back, but most have not. And so even those that felt they were ready for blended learning found that they weren't quite ready for 100% distance learning. And so how are you all leveraging technology while schools are closed? And did you feel prepared to go 100% virtual with very little notice? So Kinnery.
Sure. No, not prepared. That one was easy. I can answer that question first. There actually, and I'll answer I think there's two parts to your question, Jesse, and an excellent one. We were not prepared. And and there are some bright spots. Yeah. We're going to come back fierce and more excellent. Like we are learning and savoring those moments. I will tell you, we were not ready. In fact, when March 13th came about for us, we went pencil and paper for the first few weeks as we figured out our device distribution and access to ensure that was not a barrier. And then I would say we kind of played. We were kind of in exploration through the end of the school year. And at one point, I remember saying to my team, go be researchers. Like, go be researchers and go play in whatever sandbox you want to play with. Because we're not going to align. We're not going to have a centralized decision. You want Google, you want Zoom, go for it. Go big and try it all. And I said, what we said is school finishes in Georgia early in May. So May was when we were going to put our blinders on, and June was our design month. So what we did was we went and played and explored. And then in June, we were like, okay, what's the best of the best? And what's going to be our point of view? We got feedback from parents to ask. Our technology really was like, let's speak the language of our constituents, of our teammates, of our alumni. Were critical in these decisions, telling us which way to go. Coming out of June, we had a good plan. Fast forward to July, we launched school. I will tell you, the first week of August, I felt about this big. Yeah. I just was like, we hyped ourselves up to have this excellent plan with these 14 new platforms, and we were ready. I thought I had the Rolls Royce of school, virtual school.
Did you just say 14 new platforms? You brought in 14 new ones?
14 new platforms.
Girl!
14. And, the first week of school wasn't the same. It was hard. It was really, really hard. Yeah. And so we're 6 weeks into school. We're still learning. We're radiating the bright spots. surveying our parents and students a little bit too much probably, but we've got to get to some focus and studying what's working and leveraging what's best. And I think Q2 will bring that about. We're actually doing a step back yesterday and today to figure out how do we do the continuous improvement cycle. But lots of lessons learned.
Yeah. Well, we have a value at DreamBox called constantly learning. And so we do want to try to bring that child's eye, that child's mind to our work, to stay close to that discovery that you're describing. Because it's so rich for learning. That's how we learn. We stumble and we learn, and we're less likely to stumble in the future. It's a fantastic story.
The biggest question I would just to follow up there is, as we use a Nearpod or a Google Classroom, we're trying to figure out in some grade levels and grade bands, how do you have the capabilities to see one another, see the teacher, see your friends, and see the content.
Yes.
And that we're still exploring that.
So we're hearing that a little bit. We're hearing that people feel connected to everybody through Zoom or whatever, but intimate with no one. And so people are still craving community, even though they're like always connected. You know, it's a new normal. Jason, what was your experience?
We were fortunate because our first school was actually a fully online school that was started back in 2004. So we'd had some experiences with home-based learning, and having said that, so on one hand, we were fortunate because there were a lot of lessons that I felt like we could take from that school and share with our brick and mortar schools. We have 3 of our brick and mortar schools who had to go online last spring. And having said that, it was not as smooth as you might think. So while it was more smooth than many people report, I think there was a lot of challenges. For example, we already asked all of our families if they had home internet or a home device. And that was all around homework for our brick and mortar schools, you know, sending home computers and making sure they had internet at home. But often people would say, well, I have a home device, but a lot of our families are a little bit larger here in Idaho. And so it's not uncommon that a family would have 4 or 5 students in our school. And so they would say we have a home device and we'd have home internet, and then we would log on for live lessons. And like there's 4 or 5 people trying to log on in one home for live lessons. The internet on live video streaming was not very good in all situations. And so what we found is that we were tech heavy, but you know, we probably had enough for about 2/3 of our students to have their own computer. That wasn't enough. So we were scrambling to get our hands, along with most other schools around the country, on enough computers, get them into the hands of students, get higher speed internet into the hands of students. And so I think we found ourselves scrambling in a lot of ways as well. What we did know though, and this was the piece that I think helped the most, is we did have a sense for what high quality online learning should look like. And we did have a way to leverage some of the lessons that we had learned in our online school to share that with our brick and mortar schools as well. It was still a fast transition, and there were still a lot of things that I think a lot of people in our organization would look back and say, like, that didn't actually go that well, given everything that we knew or should have known at that time. One thing that did come from this that was actually fascinating around technology was, if there's some silver linings, because I think, you know, as we often say, like 2 things can be true at once. Like this has been a horrible, really challenging pandemic that's hurt a lot of people in a lot of ways. But there's also a lot of great things that have come from this. And one of the great things that came from this around technology is not only refining our questions and what we asked during the enrollment cycle, but also thinking about how will students own their organizational skills whenever they get home. And so what we had was in our brick and mortar schools that our students, the bell dictated a lot of what they did, or their classroom teacher dictated a lot of what they did, and they didn't have to own a lot of their organizational abilities. And when we sent them home, what we found is students who had done really well in our brick and mortar schools began to really struggle at home. Or their parents had to get really involved in helping them stay organized, make it to their live lessons on time, complete their online coursework on time that wasn't live. And so one of the things that we quickly had to develop was a set of online planners for our students to utilize, so that they could take a higher degree of ownership of their learning. And so one of the many good things that I think that a lot of schools will come out on the back end of this saying is like a student's ability to own their organizational ability, to stay on top of due dates, to stay on top of the responsibilities that they have. I think we've seen a lot of students rise up, and a lot of our staff rise up in helping students learn these abilities during this time. And that's been one of the things that I think we're really proud of our students for learning.
It's like a life skill, right? Executive function.
Yeah.
I mean, like they'll carry that with them through, they'll appreciate that when they're freshmen in college, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kevin, what kind of questions are you getting from your portfolio companies in terms of different kinds of support they're requesting from Charter School Growth Fund?
Sure. Yeah. So I think maybe a couple things, and Jason and his team at GEM were kind enough to basically share their journey
That's great.
with us, and a few case studies around Jason and GEM, and a few others that might be useful for folks. I think the Alliance has them, and you can certainly go on our website for a bunch of curated stuff that comes sort of collectively from our portfolio. I think one thing that I would say we learned from Jason and Jem and several of our others, and I'm curious, Kinnary, if this was true for you, like actually in some ways on this journey, really starting with the principal and teacher team, and really trying to figure out how that they can really own a lot of this and feel go through their own journey about we know it's not going to be perfect. We're all learning together on this. We are going to try, as Kinnary ended up doing, trying to standardize based on what is working so that we can learn fast and not feel like we're going in 100 different directions, but that we're so I would say that was one big theme that we saw, was like how do we have knowing the feedback that we're getting from families and students, then how do we translate that with our educator team to be able to to move, and then to continually innovate and know that it's not going to be perfect today or 100 days from now, but that as long as we have that sort of spirit of we're just going to get better and better and better. I would say a lot of questions around that, Jesse. I think a second one, to teasing Kinnary a little bit, like the 10 platforms kind of thing, like, oh my God, got all this stuff coming at me, and like really help me understand what things that can integrate together that make it easier for my teachers and the students and the parents, we tried to help find some examples of where people had really pulled those pieces together in a coherent way. And then I think the third one, and I would just say, like, and Kinnary and Jason both touched on this, I just think like how to help focus on mental health, both for students and for
learning guardians,
and our teachers and parents, right? Like just the ways that people are trying to figure out how to do that, when to bring parties, etc. I think that's probably been one where, Jesse, we have a sort of listserv of CEOs and academic officers, etc. You see a lot of dialogue around that theme as well.
I think that will continue. We'll see that continue.
Agreed.
NWEA had a study recently published that said that they anticipate that in the area of ELA, there'll be a 30% learning loss, and in the area of mathematics, over 50% learning loss. And that's in general. One thing that weighs heavily on me is what is going to happen to the marginalized communities, to the kids that are chronically disconnected, or the kids like Jason, you described. They might be in a check mark of having a home with broadband or having a home with a device, but there's not 5 devices, and there's not broadband enough to work with solutions like DreamBox, for example. Like, how are you guys assessing where your kids are now, not only emotionally, but academically? And what is your strategy to get a snapshot of where they are so you can modify your instructional approach to them when they do come back to you? with more time. How are you handling that, Jason?
There's a couple things that we're looking at right now. None of them are perfect. So whenever students are at home, the home environment can drive so much of their performance on anything that we talk about. Again, the students who have been highly successful in a brick and mortar day-to-day attendance type situation may actually struggle because of their parental situation or their home situation. But generally speaking, one of the things that we continue to do, even when we close down in the spring, we continue to do now, we do these readiness quizzes, which are in essence old released SBAC questions every Friday to assess their learning on the standards that were taught that week. And so we have some sense of their mastery of each of the standards that are being taught. And then we've got intervention programs that continue, just like we did in the brick and mortar school, just virtually. So students who didn't master those things qualify for some additional support in those things. So they're taking them from home. There's no guarantee that someone's not helping them with these, but the reality is that as a general rule of thumb, you can see some trends in where students are struggling or need additional help, or students who are mastering this content and ready to keep moving. I think another thing that we tried to do is, and this became a bigger issue whenever students went home. Assignment completion percentage became a much better indicator of the success or failure of the learning process than it was. I mean, it's already a big deal, even when you're going to school day in and day out, but if students are not completing assignments, submitting assignments on time, there's just no way that they're going to move ahead. And so we started to look more closely than we ever had in the past at assignment completion. And that became one of the triggers that would cause us to really intervene and provide additional support to students.
So it's like a leading indicator.
Yeah. I mean, you got to think what that would do to a GPA for just about any student who didn't turn things in for a couple of weeks. And but it would flag us to say that there's something happening here, that we've got to intervene and provide some additional support for the students. So in some cases, we brought them into the building. I know not everywhere can do that, but in our state, we were allowed to bring them into the building for some additional support. And so, but even if we couldn't, we reached out and tried to provide additional support for those students. So those are two things that really helped us: assignment completion and then our readiness quizzes.
So I'm wondering, Kinnery, if not having, because I know that a lot of schools across the United States canceled their spring assessments. And maybe they're going to be canceling more. And so a lot of learning guardians don't have the input from these assessments that they would have had. So how have you tackled that?
Yeah, and I would say we are, if we got a grade today, we do not have a passing one. So we're in design, I would say. This has been hard for us, and I would just start from an infrastructure perspective.
Yeah.
We do not have the data infrastructure. We're 11 schools big, 5,000 students, and we have some data infrastructure, but the robust data collection that is available to us at this current moment, we are feeling some real pain. So when you asked about what supports like we need to shore up, we are now needing to bolster our data team and our tech team to really get that systems integration piece, getting everything speaking to one another, from attendance to all the great platforms that we are using now, and we're not collecting the just right data and then having it inform tomorrow's lesson, because we're so used to collecting that data in person in brick and mortar. So our monitoring daily learning has to get redefined, reimagined, and then resourced. And that is, like success for us at the end of September coming into the first week of October is like Zendesk tickets need to be answered in 2 minutes. Like they cannot be 3 days long, because that's 3 days of learning loss. So one is we just got to shore that up. We are designing an 18-month to 24-month scope and sequence, prioritizing standards, power standards, and designing assessments, working with partners to roadmap what the next year and a half to 2 years will look like. So I think that is going to allow us to play catch up, intervene, and spend enough time with the just right, most important standards rather than all. So we are in kind of standards-based prioritization while simultaneously dealing with this data infrastructure piece, just because we just weren't ready for the pivot.
That's so thoughtful about tough choices. I mean, one of the things that we heard among all of our clients at DreamBox was, we need to get a snapshot of where kids are when they do come back to us, even if it's part-time in person and part-time virtual. And the spring tests were canceled, and we don't know where they are. We need a snapshot. So one of the things we were trying to do to try to help with that situation that you just articulated was, how can we give administrators some insight about what has happened while kids have been at home, right? Because learning guardians are used to controlling the school setting and all of a sudden they have all these balkanized students. How do they harness that? And how do they modify their live instruction to make sure they meet every child where they are? And so that was a challenge. And while we were going through our own kind of typhoon, we decided to launch a new capability for folks like you, so that you could get that snapshot, DreamBox Predictive Insights, so that you could get insights about where every child was, and then have enough information to modify your instructional strategy. And that was really hard on the team, because that wasn't our plan. Our plan wasn't to do DreamBox Predictive Insights for folks like you, frankly. It was really to do it for people who are leading instruction with the teachers. And so we flipped the order of what we were going to do, and we started out with administrators so that you could have a sense of what it was. And we are just hearing that so many people are in that same place that you are. And even after going through V1 and V2 of how do we manage in this situation, they still need more actionable insights for their kids. So I know this is an ongoing struggle for kids and administrators. So Kevin, from Charter School Growth Fund standpoint, are there things that you're doing differently to support leaders like Kinnary and Jason outside of the classroom? You've been very consistent about the care and about the social emotional learning, and really it's about managing through trauma. I mean, we haven't said that word, but that's what I'm getting from these leaders. Is there anything different that Charter School Growth Fund is doing or is planning to do to help leaders through this?
Sure. Well, I'm sure there are lots more that we can be doing, and we have the great privilege to work with people like Kinnary and Jason, who are incredible who we get to learn from every day. I think, Jesse, our approach over the last 6 months, and I think this will be true for the next 6 months for us too, is really three things. One, we had the chance to basically send some money to everyone, which we did in
money's good.
Starting in March and through June in a few different installments, which was good. And basically the idea was, wasn't a huge amount of money to any one group, but hopefully it was enough to be able to have Kinnary or Jason make a call on something that they needed to do, whether it was get food to families, provide support to alumni who were stuck at a college, get home, to go get devices, because there's 5 kids in the family and there's only one device, and internet, etc. Like, the idea was around that. So we definitely accelerated resources in it. So that was one. I think a second thing that was guiding us was the most scarce resource for a leader like Kinnary or Jason or like you, Jesse, in a typhoon is time. And so what we tried to do was to provide curated resources and advice when people were facing a tricky issue, to try to save leaders time. Like, great question, let us go dig on it, find out, and then not try to give you the answer, but give you the, hey, this is how you might think about it. Here's how 3 other people have handled this. And
best practices.
Try to save you time.
Yeah, that's great.
And then I would just say the third one is really just building and doubling down on building a community where people can pick up the phone each other in a trusting environment, and to provide the resources to be able to make that happen. I think that the last piece for us is we also think that, and Kinnary and Jason are both such great examples of this, like that ability to think about we are going to get through this, and how do we emerge stronger and better, and not feel like we're just trying to return to what we were doing in February 1st of 2020, and also just acknowledging like that really wasn't working for lots of kids and families, and that how can we take this typhoon and have the chance to emerge stronger and better, and really try to help think about what might be next, in terms of how schools really are centers of the community. Like we've seen in this last 6 months that they are centerpieces, right? It's where food gets distributed, and where healthcare, and how are people going to vote, and all those things that in some ways we rely on schools and we're sort of hidden.
The whole of Maslow's hierarchy.
Correct.
Managing.
Exactly right. That's right.
Yeah.
And so I think, when I think about the next 6 months, it's really going to be continuing on the base of those first three, but as people start to try to think about what might be next over these next few years, to hopefully be there with resources and support for people to think about,
what can be.
What can come out of this.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about that. I'm going to ask the audience to start sending in some questions. But before we move to questions, I have one more question for the panelists. So I'm asking you to think about the future. And I know that part of the technique for surviving this pandemic has been to really make our vision really short-sighted. We used to think in terms of quarters at DreamBox. Now we think in terms of months. And there was a time we were thinking in terms of weeks and literally day to day, because things were changing so quickly. So if you could just almost close your eyes and think about 5 years from now, and think about what happened now that made your work more successful 5 years from now, that might not have happened had this pandemic not been thrust on us. So as you look into the future, look through the prism of this crisis, what positive outcome did it generate that made you and your organizations more successful 5 years out? So while they're thinking about that, I'm encouraging the audience to come in with questions. We want this to be a dialogue. We really want to know what's on your mind. And we have amazing leaders here who are so thoughtful. You have a unique opportunity to get some questions in front of them. So Jason, 5 years out.
So the first part of this answer, I think, is a mindset thing. And the last part is kind of the practical reality of that mindset. I think 5 years out, I hope that we are looking back, not just us as an organization, but a lot of educational institutions who are leading out right now in this, can look back and say, this is the time that we finally realized that learning and physical attendance were not synonymous with one another. That you don't have to have a student on campus every single day for high quality learning to happen. Like, I realize that's the ideal situation, but for decades, we've had tools and the ability to do something more. But if a student had a cough, could still learn, but had to stay home because we didn't want to spread it to anybody else. Right. There was very little learning happening in most cases. I realize there are exceptions to what I'm saying, but as a general rule of thumb, things that shouldn't stop learning from happening have stopped learning from happening. And Kinnary, like you, I'm convinced that we are going to get through this COVID pandemic and we're going to come out better on the other side. But I'm also convinced that there's going to be continued disruptions to learning going forward. And whether it's earthquakes, fires, floods, whatever the next pandemic is, and I hope we don't ever have another one, but the reality is there's always threats to disrupt the learning environment. When I was teaching down in Houston, there was always hurricanes and floods just about every year that canceled school for a few days. And the reality is when we can disconnect physical attendance from the ability to learn, I think we can think a lot differently about this and do something different. For example, and this is the latter half of the answer I was referring to, last spring, our ed team said, I was so optimistic that this thing would be over by like mid-June that I wasn't thinking this way, but our ed team said, look, this is probably going to impact the fall. We need to develop every lesson we teach in a way that doesn't matter what format we're learning in, online, hybrid, or face-to-face, doesn't matter. We need to develop our lessons so they can be universally applicable this fall. The pacing doesn't fall behind, that the content doesn't suffer, that the standards get covered in a deep and rich and meaningful way. And so they went about that this spring with our teachers, developing that content so that when we came back this fall, that was one thing that we didn't have to sweat figuring out. And that's been such a valuable thing because one of my schools came back full-time face-to-face, the one in Pocatello. The spread wasn't very bad in that community. All the students came back. Two of my schools started online. And then as of a week ago, they're back hybrid. So the ability to toggle between those things, and if we have a bad outbreak in the school that came back full time, they're probably gonna have to go to hybrid or online. So the ability to toggle between those things, that was brought on by the pandemic. That wasn't something that was forefront of our mind before this pandemic came. So again, one of the silver linings about this pandemic is it's forcing us to think differently about how we equate physical attendance.
So interesting. You're talking about a dexterity to float in between different kinds of learning models and have them be equally impactful in terms of learning, even though they're very different. And to be able to do it on a dime. That's a very interesting idea. Kinnery.
Yeah, so 5 years from now, I thought of 5 things, so I'll go fast. I believe we will be more prioritized. And everything won't be in the urgent and important bucket. I think we'll have some anchor and some range to say, no, that's not as important. And I know why. I think we're gonna have a strong focus on community and togetherness and a sense of belonging and really implement that beyond the word, but get into the feelings of it. I think we're gonna have a best practice in radiating the best. Being able to zoom in and out or be in a team's room or whatever it is, like we just know who the best 5th grade teacher is in social studies.
Interesting.
And we are gonna have a library of excellence and coaching tools to reimagine and define teacher preparation to be excellent from the first at bat or the first teach. The 4th thing I would say is we're gonna have an individualized approach. This is teaching us that, as Kevin and Jason said, what we were doing before was not working with the utmost stellar results. So we are going to come out of this in a more individualized approach. I wonder about a 4-day school week where you are doing your individualized learning day plan on Friday or something different. And the most important thing, and I saved it for last, is we're gonna be different. We're gonna have reimagined without that mental hold of what we think school should be. Had the great fortune of hearing Tim Wise at Standards Institute a year or 2 ago, and he said, you know, form follows function, and school was not designed for Black and brown children in America. And so we better not be 5 years from now still trying to design school like it was. This is our moment. And so the work, the personal work specifically for people of color to reimagine, to redesign without shackles, without a mental hold, I will have failed if we do not do that. And I look forward to the new way that is inclusive of every person in America, the fabric of our country that we know it should be.
Thank you.
And it's
so
exciting. And I wear yellow more often than I need to, just to remind me to keep some optimism alive on
Sunshine.
today.
That's right. So we have a couple questions here. I'm going to go to Kevin to get your futuristic view, and then we're going to go to some questions.
Kinnery is the new Secretary of Education.
I'm telling you.
That's my 5-year view. Amen to both of those, Kinnery and Jason. Yeah, I would just say that the themes around individualization and personalization. I do think school as center of community, and breaking down, as Kinnary eloquently put, like it wasn't designed. It's not designed for particularly Black and brown kids to be able to succeed. Like the fact that we have schools end in June and start in August or September, and there's this summer where we're like, everyone do your own thing. Like and lots of families are working and all that kind of stuff. Like that's not set up for, if you said, we're going to figure out what's going to work the best for families. That's not how you would set it up.
That's not the design you would have come up with.
No,
Yeah.
exactly. So I think, and I think it'll be a combination of a bunch of these things, like school open all year round. But to Kinnery's point, maybe, and Jason's point, maybe they're in person only 4 days.
Yeah.
And there's a day where kids are learning from home, or they are, visiting museums, or they're interning, or they're, all
doing projects outside of school.
right, exactly. Yeah. But it's basically a year long. And I think we're going to probably need it to catch kids up. Like we need more time.
My sister is a fourth grade teacher, and focuses on marginalized communities. And it was really hard for her during this COVID pandemic. And there were moments where she thought she wasn't going to continue. I wasn't going to be able to continue as a teacher because she couldn't take care of herself. So we have a question here from Tina about teacher health. How are your organizations supporting teacher mental health? Kinnary, do you want to take that?
Sure. So we've been doing school visits, virtual school visits. We've been in school 6 weeks, and about 3 weeks ago, we do empathy interviews. So we reach out to our family members, students, and teachers who are at the margin so that we can design for them at the center. And I will tell you that the resounding feedback was that we have all the tools, we have all the technologies, all the stuff that we need to have school at home, but we're not okay. And I'm talking about male, men of color, telling a room full of leaders, like they're not okay. And it was in that moment that our chief schools officer have an amazing team. So everything I'm telling you today is, I stand on the shoulders of giants and angels. And, we had this moment where we said, we can't keep pretending like we can do 5 days of Zoom, 8 o'clock to 4 p.m., run AM and PM sessions. And we just said, we're the designers. We got to stop this. We got to take care of our own. And we said, success for us is coming out of this mentally, physically, and emotionally well. So we had an all-day planning meeting with our principals and our leadership team. And we are now implementing what we're calling a 3-1-1 schedule. We do 3 days of synchronous learning. We do 1 day of async. And we do 1 day of connections. And connections looks different each week. We wrap up the school day at 1 p.m. So for little Kipsters, it's advisory, affinity groups, lunch bunch, play dates, parent-teacher conferences on driveways, one-on-one phone calls, just like how are you doing? And then starting at 2 o'clock, it's like Fun Friday for the grown-ups. We're doing sound baths, healing circles, meditation, sip and paints, walking dates, day parties. And so we just are, and they're all optional. You don't have to do them, but Friday is a time of just connecting. So we've kind of put the standards to the side and we've said, we will be successful today if you feel socially and spiritually intimate with one another so that your mental health is ready for the next week. And we're getting really good feedback. I look forward to Fridays. We had to do something different.
Well, I think there's a lesson for me in that. I love that story. So Jason, we have another question here about the future profile of teachers. It reads, do the panelists believe the demographics of teachers will look different as a result of the pandemic?
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
I think will likely happen over time. I don't know if this will happen overnight, but I think what will happen over time is the qualities that we seek in teachers and that we develop in teachers could change fairly dramatically based on the earlier conversation we were having about how education in general changes. I think one of the ways that that could change the demographics of teachers is who we look at as the pipeline. And so as we start to look at an increasing pace at internal people who are serving in service positions in our schools, paraprofessionals, lunch people, receptionists, people of that nature, and start looking that these are the people who possess more of the qualities that we need for our students to be successful, meaning that they already care deeply about the students. They know the school culture, they know the school community, and we're trying to qualify them to step into a different role in the organization. I believe the demographics could change. I think it's going to have to be intentional, though. I don't think very much of value is accomplished without intentionality. And so I think if schools were to reflect on who they have, who cares deeply about the children, cares deeply about their success, doesn't care so much if they get a summer break or not, but actually cares far more about the success of the students and the families that they serve, I think it could have a significant positive impact on the demographics of our teaching population.
Well, we are close to the end of our time, and I just wanted to end by asking each of you to think about one word. We are so blessed to have the caliber and the heart and the talent that you all bring as leaders into this work. Short of parenthood, I can't think of anything that's more noble than preparing kids to succeed in life and in learning in the future. So thank you to all of you. So the one word, I'm wondering, as you think about where we are now in school reform, what is the one word that captures how you feel about the future of school reform? Kinnery.
Iterate.
Iterate. Kevin.
Driven.
Driven. Jason.
Hope.
Hope. And I'll add mine, determined. Thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate you and all that you're doing to help kids thrive.
Thanks so much,
Jesse.
Matt.
Thanks for having us. It was
for
an
having
honor.
us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. We encourage you to stay in touch with us. We will share the recording, and we have several recordings and resources available on our website, publiccharters.org/webinars. Thank you and have a wonderful day.